Okay, so let's unpack this today. If you were watching television in 1996, specifically on Monday nights, you might remember a moment that just felt, well, it felt incredibly off.
Oh, yeah. Very off.
Right. So a guy walks out. He's got the slick back hair, the vest, the little toothpick flicked right at the camera. The music hits. It is Razor Ramon.
Yep.
Except if you looked closer or, honestly, if you just had working eyes, you realize pretty quickly that is definitely not Scott Hall.
The infamous fake razor. I mean, it is one of those images that's just permanently burned into the retinas of wrestling fans everywhere.
It really is. And it's usually treated as a punchline, right? Just this moment of corporate madness where the World Wrestling Federation thought they could just swap a human being out like a spare tire and nobody would notice.
Like recasting a sitcom character, but in a live arena.
Exactly. But here is where it gets really interesting and why we're doing this deep dive today. We're not just going to talk about a bad casting decision. We're going to talk about the man inside that vest.
Right, because if you stop at the fake razor joke, you miss the actual tragedy and, honestly, the triumph of Rick Bognar.
Yeah.
Because this is a guy who went from fighting for literal beer money in Calgary to being a legitimate superstar in Japan, got chewed up by the American corporate machine, broke his neck, and somehow came out the other side as a spiritual guide.
Yeah, guru might be a strong word, but he literally wrote a book called Wrestling with Consciousness.
Which is an incredible title.
Honestly, best title for a memoir I've heard in a long time.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to figure out how you get from point A, which is being this brash knuckles champion in a ring surrounded by barbed wire, to point B, teaching mindfulness and psychology.
It's quite the pivot.
It is. So we've pulled together the match records from FMW, WWF, New Japan, his biography, and various articles from the time. We're going to distill all these sources and really meet Rick Bognar, because his story definitely does not start in the WWF.
No, much more humbly than that. He was born in Vancouver in 1970, and he breaks into the business in 1988. So he's around 19 years old.
Just a kid.
Just a kid. And the sources paint this really gritty picture of the Western Canadian independent circuit at that time.
Yeah, I found this detail in the notes. Completely wild. So he has his first match in Calgary. He's 19. He is putting his body on the line. And do you want to tell him what the payout was?
Well, it certainly wasn't a check.
Nope. $25 and a six-pack of beer.
Which is just the quintessential paying your dues story in professional wrestling.
But wait, explain the economics of that to me. Because you cannot live on $25 and some beer a month.
You absolutely can't. And that's why the sources note he spent 2 years working as a bouncer just to fund his wrestling habit.
Wow.
Yeah, he was only getting matches a couple of times a month using these early names like Rick Titan or, I love this one, Mega Mask.
Mega Mask. That's fantastic.
Right. And he was big. He was 6'7", 285 pounds. But in Canada, he was just another big guy trying to get booked.
So he's stuck in this loop, right? Bouncing at clubs, wrestling for beer. How does he actually break out? Because normally the path is you go south, you go to the U.S.
Normally, yes, but Bognar looked east.
Oh.
In 1991, he did what every hungry wrestler did in the pre-internet era. He mailed a physical videotape.
A VHS tape.
A VHS tape. And he sent it to Atsushi Onita in Japan, who is the head of FMW.
Okay, we need to pause on Atsushi Onita and FMW for a second. Because if you just say to the listener, hey, he went to Japan, they might picture, a nice traditional sporting event.
Oh, no.
Right. FMW stands for Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling. And from what I'm reading in these sources, martial arts is a very loose term. This sounds more like a demolition derby.
That is a very fair comparison. FMW was not about technical arm bars and headlocks. It was the direct precursor to the extreme hardcore wrestling we saw later in the late 90s.
The really bloody stuff.
Exactly. They replaced the ring ropes with barbed wire. They used C4 explosive.
Literal explosives in the ring.
Yes. It was violent, it was incredibly bloody, and it was just pure theater of the absurd.
And so Onita, this mad genius running the company, sees a tape of this massive Canadian kid and just thinks, perfect.
Exactly. Bognar had the size, he had the look, he was intimidating. So he flies over in 1991, and almost overnight, his entire narrative changes. He isn't the struggling Rick Titan anymore. They rename him Big Titan.
And does it work? Like, is the success instant?
It is staggering how fast he gets over. He debuts in July of 91. By January 15, 1992, he is standing in the ring across from Onita himself.
The founder of the company.
The founder, the ace, the absolute biggest star they have. And Bognar wins. He defeats Onita to win the FMW Brass Knuckles Heavyweight Championship. That's his first pro title.
Hold on, let me stop you there.
Yeah.
Because from what I understand about Japanese wrestling, how rare is that? For a Gaijin, a foreigner, to just walk in and beat the owner for the top belt within 6 months.
It is incredibly rare. Usually the foreigner is brought in just to be the big, scary monster that the local hero eventually vanquishes to make the crowd happy.
Right, the final boss that you always beat.
Exactly. So for Onita to actually put the top belt on Bognar, even if the reign only lasted 15 days, it signaled a massive amount of trust. It meant Bognar could safely work the crowd, he could handle the really grueling physical style, and most importantly, the fans believed he was a legitimate champion.
So he is decidedly not a joke at this point. He's a legitimate headliner in a major market.
Far from a joke. He's a massive star. He joins this stable called Team Canada with the Gladiator and Dr. Luther.
Awesome names.
Right. And he and the Gladiator actually become the first ever FMW Brass Knuckles Tag Team Champions in 1994.
Wow.
Plus, he's hustling globally. He's touring Germany with the CWA, feuding with a guy named Rambo. He's working in Japan's war promotion, feuding with Junichiro Tenryu, who is a living legend. So by 1995, if you're a scout looking at talent anywhere in the world, Rick Bognar is a blue-chip prospect.
Which brings us to the turning point of his entire life. The phone call that changes everything. 1996. The WWF comes calling.
Yep.
Bret Hart reportedly put in a really good word for him. So Bognar gets a tryout match, beats a guy named Frank Stiletto, and he gets hired.
Now, if this were a movie, this is the happy ending, right? The bouncer from Vancouver who worked for beer finally makes it to the big leagues in America. But the timing of this, it was a complete disaster.
You really have to understand the corporate landscape of the WWF in 1996 to see why this failed. The company was absolutely panicking.
This is the Monday Night Wars.
Exactly. Two of their biggest homegrown stars, Scott Hall, who played Razor Ramon, and Kevin Nash, who played Diesel, had just defected to WCW, their direct rival. And WCW was just crushing the WWF in the TV ratings.
So the WWF is bleeding top-tier talent. And instead of, creating new characters for their new hires, they decide to do what exactly?
They decided to play hardball with intellectual property.
Of course they did.
The WWF lawyers basically came out and said, look, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash are gone. But they don't own those characters. We do. We own the trademark for Razor Ramon. We own the purple vest. We own the concept of Diesel. It just feels so petty. It's like if a famous band broke up and the record label just hired 4 random musicians off the street, put them in the exact same wigs and outfits, and told the fans, hey, look, it's still the Beatles.
That is exactly what it was. It was intended to be this legal flex and also a storyline heel turn for the announcer, Jim Ross.
Right.
Ross introduced these new versions of the characters to prove that the WWF machine created the stars, not the men themselves, basically saying wrestlers are just interchangeable parts on an assembly line.
But the audience isn't stupid. You can't just swap out a real human face and expect people not to notice.
No, and that is exactly where the master plan collapsed. When Bognar walked out as Razor Ramon and Glenn Jacobs walked out as the fake Diesel, the fans didn't boo them because they were bad guys in the story. They booed because they felt their intelligence was being insulted.
Yeah, looking at the notes on the 1997 Royal Rumble, this really seems like the moment the company realized, oh, wow, this is not working at all.
It was the absolute death knell for the gimmick. So Bognar enters the Rumble match, which is their second biggest show of the year.
Right.
And he is the very first person eliminated. Ahmed Johnson literally throws him out almost immediately. And in wrestling language, when you get dumped first like that, that is the company publicly washing its hands of you.
It's just brutal. And the critics destroyed it, too. The Wrestling Observer newsletter, which is basically the Wall Street Journal of Wrestling, voted it the worst gimmick of 1996. They also voted the whole recast idea the most disgusting promotional tactic. So Bognar, through no fault of his own, becomes the face of arguably the worst idea in wrestling history.
And he is totally stuck. He's a highly talented, well-traveled guy, but he's trapped in a costume that everyone actively despises. And here's the real sliding doors moment that just kind of haunts this whole story. His partner, the fake Diesel.
Glenn Jacobs.
Right.
Glenn Jacobs somehow survives this absolute train wreck of a storyline.
He does. Jacobs was eventually repackaged. They put him in a full face mask, called him Kane, made him the evil brother of The Undertaker, and he goes on to have an absolute Hall of Fame legendary career.
But they didn't do anything like that for Bognar. They didn't repackage him.
Not at all. Once the fake razor experiment was deemed a failure, Bognar was just let go. Jacobs got a magical second chance, and Bognar got a pink slip.
Man, that has to completely mess with your head. You do
Okay.
exactly what the billionaire boss tells you to do. You play the role, you take all the public humiliation from the fans, and then you're the one who just gets discarded.
It's a massive psychological blow,
Yeah.
just devastating. But this is where Bognar's resilience really kicks in. He doesn't quit the business. He takes the razor gimmick down to Mexico to work for AAA, and then to the USWA in Memphis.
Oh, wait. I see a note here about a loser leaves town match in the USWA. Please tell me it was against Fake Diesel.
It actually was.
That is amazing.
It's almost poetic, really. He wrestles his former partner, Fake Diesel. Bognar wins the match. Fake Diesel leaves town, basically, so Glenn Jacobs can go off to become Kane, and Bognar finally gets to shed the Razor Ramon skin. He goes back to being Rick Titan.
He reclaims his actual identity.
He does. And in 1998, he returns to the one place that actually respected his talent, Japan. But this time, he doesn't go to FMW. He goes to New Japan Pro Wrestling, which is the biggest, most prestigious promotion in the country. He joins the NWO Japan faction. He's performing in the massive Tokyo Dome. He is officially back.
But just as he's rebuilding his career, we hit the physical wall. And this part of the story, honestly, it makes me cringe just looking at the notes. February 15, 1998.
Yeah, so he's in a match against Shinya Hashimoto. Now, for listeners who might not know, Hashimoto was notorious in Japan. He hit incredibly hard. He was stiff. It wasn't a choreographed dance with him. It was basically a real fight.
And something goes wrong with a move called a DDT, right?
Correct. A DDT is a move where you grab your opponent in a front face lock and drop backward, driving their head into the mat. In this case, the timing was just slightly off. Bognar landed directly on the crown of his head. The impact was so severe, it caused a hairline fracture of his C5 and C6 vertebrae.
Okay, let's just be very clear for everyone listening. That is a broken neck. That is absolute, don't move an inch, call the paramedics, stretcher out territory.
Medically and structurally, yes, absolutely. But Bognar, he gets up and finishes the match.
How is that even physiologically possible? Is it just pure adrenaline?
Adrenaline, shock, and honestly the toxic tough guy culture of the wrestling business at that time, you just did not stop a match. But what's even more terrifying is what happened after he went to the back. Because he didn't take 6 months off to heal.
No way, you're kidding.
He kept wrestling. He participated in the IWGP Tag Team Tournament in June of that same year. And then, and this is the part that is truly hard to fathom, he entered the G1 Climax Tournament in August.
You need to explain the G1 Climax. Because that's not just showing up for one match on a Sunday, right?
Not at all. It is widely considered the most grueling tournament in professional wrestling. It's a massive round-robin tournament. You are wrestling high-intensity singles matches, often going 20 or 30 minutes long, night after night for weeks on end. It routinely destroys completely healthy bodies. Rick Bognar did the entire tournament with a healing broken neck.
That crosses the line from being tough to being, like, deeply self-destructive, doesn't it?
It does, and I think it speaks directly to the immense pressure he felt. He had lost his big spot in America. He was desperately trying to prove he was still elite in Japan, and he just pushed his body way past the breaking point.
And eventually the bill has to come due on that kind of physical debt.
It always does. He wrestled his last major match for New Japan in March of 1999. He did a very brief run back home in Calgary for Stampede Wrestling. But by 2000, he officially had to retire. He was only 30 years old.
30. I mean, 30 is usually when a professional wrestler is just hitting their absolute prime.
Exactly. They're just figuring out the psychology of the crowd. So now you have this 30-year-old man. His body is completely wrecked. His biggest fame in America is being a widely mocked fake version of someone else. And his entire career is over. This is exactly the moment where so many wrestling stories turn into deep tragedies. The addiction, the deep depression.
But Rick Bognar, he pivoted. And not just a small career pivot. He completely reinvented his entire operating system.
He really did. He went straight to school. He enrolled at Kwantlen Polytechnic University and dedicated himself to studying business and psychology.
You know, psychology seems like the absolute perfect field for someone who has just been through the Carnival Funhouse mirror of pro wrestling.
It makes total sense.
Yeah.
He started to process his own wild experiences, the massive highs of main eventing the Tokyo Dome, the intense public humiliation of the fake razor gimmick, the chronic pain of the broken neck, and he decided to use all of that trauma to help others. He became a speaker.
But the sources are clear that he was very specific about his title. He did not want to be called a motivational speaker.
No, he preferred the term transformational speaker. And he wrote that book we mentioned earlier, Wrestling with Consciousness, which came out in 2010.
I really want to dig into that concept for a second. Wrestling with consciousness. What was he actually teaching people? Was it just kind of standard, think positive self-help stuff?
It was significantly deeper than that. He drew from his education to teach specific techniques, breathing exercises, deep meditation, cognitive reframing, to deal with deep-seated anger and regret. He talked a lot about how the wrestling business is entirely predicated on creating conflict. The whole model is about fighting. But a healthy, happy life is about resolving conflict. So he literally had to unlearn the very instincts that made him a millionaire star in Japan.
Wow. That is such a profound shift in mindset. To go from a world where you are financially rewarded for aggression to a world where you are rewarded for inner peace.
And by all accounts, he really seemed to find that peace. He even managed to keep a great sense of humor about his past. He actually did some acting later on.
Yes. I saw the IMDb credits in the notes. He played the meanest barbarian on the TV show. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
And he played a literal Sasquatch in a movie called Painkillers. He wasn't hiding from his massive physical size or his past. He was just finally having fun with it. He even reconnected with the wrestling world in a really healthy, giving way. He helped train Jinder Mahal, who eventually went on to become a WWE champion.
So he didn't run away from wrestling in the end. He made peace with his place in it.
Exactly. He integrated it. He wasn't fake Razor anymore. He wasn't even Big Titan anymore. He was just Rick.
Which really makes the end of this story so heartbreaking to read.
It definitely catches you off guard. On September 20, 2019, Rick Bognar passed away suddenly. It was a heart attack. He was only 49 years old.
It just feels deeply unfair. Like he'd done all the hard work, he had fixed his mind, he had fixed his life, he was helping people, and then he's just gone before he even hits 50.
It is incredibly tragic. But, you know, if we look at the actual philosophy he was teaching in his later years, he talked a lot about the impermanence of things. He wrote heavily about living in the now, because the character you play in life, whether that's a professional wrestler, a CEO, or a podcast host, is ultimately just a costume.
So if we zoom out and look at this whole deep dive, what is the ultimate legacy here? Because for most casual fans, his name is still just a trivia question from 1996.
I think his true legacy is incredible adaptability. Just think about the sheer range of this man's life. He was a struggling bouncer, a Japanese cultural icon, a corporate pariah in the WWF, a legitimate tough guy wrestling a tournament with a broken neck, and finally, a peaceful scholar of the human mind.
It really challenges that whole idea of being defined by your worst public failure.
That's the key takeaway for me. The entire world tried to define him by the fake Razor gimmick. They tried to make his whole existence a joke, but he simply refused to accept that as the end of his story.
It reminds me of that saying, you are not your job, and you definitely aren't the worst costume your boss ever made you wear on national television.
Precisely. And I actually want to leave you with a thought today, a bit of a provocative question to chew on. We spend so much time in wrestling circles analyzing why the fake Razor thing was a disaster. But ask yourself this. If that disaster hadn't happened, if he had just stayed in Japan and had a nice, steady, successful career as Big Titan, would he have ever written Wrestling with Consciousness?
Oh, that's interesting. Did the absolute failure force the spiritual growth?
Sometimes you have to be completely stripped of your identity, humiliated even, to start asking the really big questions about who you actually are. Bognar was forced to be a literal fake version of someone else in front of millions of people. Maybe that trauma was the ultimate crash course in figuring out how to be the real version of himself.
Failure as the literal fuel for enlightenment. I mean, that is a hell of a legacy for the bad guy in the vest.
It certainly is.
Well, that is going to do it for our deep dive today into the many, many lives of Rick Bognar. A truly fascinating story of grit, terrible corporate gimmicks, and ultimately finding peace. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.